Yeah, listen, for those of you who don't know me, usually I'm sitting there, and it feels very odd to be here in this pulpit. I'm up here really high. You know, this reminds me of a story of a graduate from seminary, Unitarian. He was called to his first church, and of course he wanted that first Sunday to go over really well. So he prepared his sermon carefully, and then after it was all done, he decided he would memorize it, and then when he was in the pulpit, do it extemporaneously, or at least give that appearance. His text that morning was from the New Testament, just 3 words, the divine saying, "Behold, I come." And then he was going to explain to the congregation how God comes into life. So that Sunday, he got to church, and sure enough, it was full, more full than it is on Christmas or Easter, because everybody wanted to see the new pastor. So he stepped into the pulpit, and the opening was that text. So he said, "Behold, I come." And nothing came. His mind went blank. He was so nervous. So he went back and sat down and just talked to himself, and he said, "It's just nerves. Go on up there and get into it." So he thought with a little more energy it would work. So he stepped into the pulpit a second time, a little louder. "Behold, I come." Nothing. Blank mind. Very embarrassing. You can imagine. First Sunday, he sat down and said to himself, "Don't panic. It's there. You prepared it." And he thought maybe if he give it more energy, it would work. So he leapt out of the chair, ran into the pulpit, screaming at the top of his voice, "Behold, I come!" And he hit the pulpit, knocking it over, and he rolled and fell and struck the most senior member of the congregation. He was terribly embarrassed. He was apologizing profusely. And the woman, bless her, looked at him and said, "Pastor, you don't need to apologize. After all, you warned me 3 times you were coming." I want to read you a few excerpts from a letter written to Dear Abby, advice columnist. By the way, the letter is signed, "A Happy Hindu in the Bible Belt." So maybe she's from Tulsa, the letter writer. "Dear Abby, I'm a Hindu woman living in the Bible Belt. Many of my friends and acquaintances are Christians. And they're all wonderful, except for one thing." She said, "Some try in subtle ways to convert me to their faith." She says, "With Christmas approaching, I know what's coming. Boxes of baked goodies packed with little brochures and pamphlets tucked inside about Jesus, his birth, and the Christian faith." She says, "Abby, I wish you would remind people that all of us in this diverse nation should respect the faiths of others." And listen to a Hindu woman, how she sees that kind of thing taking place. "To try to convert someone to your faith implies that you consider your religious beliefs superior. And this is just plain wrong." She concludes, "Abby, what's a tactful but firm way of dealing with this?" Now, one of the things I love about Dear Abby is she's very short. If you ever look, the letters are long, and then the response is real tight and concise. So she cuts right through it. She says, "Dear Happy Hindu in the Bible Belt, you can't change these people. Ignore the brochures, eat the cookies." Yes. Yes. Now, here's the thing. I am classically trained in theology as a Christian minister. I have a Master of Divinity from the University of Toronto. I did doctoral studies in New Testament. I know the tradition. But I tell you, when I read a letter like that, I feel for her. But the bigger, more growing feeling in me is a flash of irritation with Christianity for doing that kind of thing and putting that kind of pressure on us to act that way. Because when people do that, all they're doing is conveying a sense of not God's love, but a sense of superiority, arrogance, judgmentalism, all flavored with a profound lack of tolerance and respect for the other person and their belief. And you know, this has happened so often that people, Christian people, are getting fed up with it. And they're dropping out of their churches. And they have a phrase for themselves. There's actually an acronym for it, SBNR. I'm spiritual, but not religious. SBNR. If you Google it, there are several Facebook pages devoted to the movement and several web pages. Listen, this is a growing movement of people simply fed up. They're not just dropping out, they're quitting and not coming back to their churches. The Southern Baptist Convention just did a poll because they wondered where the young people were, and so they polled people between 18 and 29. Here's what they found. 72% don't go to church anymore and say, I'm spiritual, but not religious. SBNR, a whole generation gone. Newsweek did a poll to see what the broader picture was, and this is 2006. 35% of American adults say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Now, you know, this movement, there's a lot about it that's very, very good. I like it. And the themes that they're espousing, I think, are themes you and I would be comfortable with. For example, they believe that all of the world's religions contain some truth, but no one religion contains all the truth. They prefer the word wisdom to that harsh word truth. They feel that behavior is far more important than belief. And they want to be guided by an inner light in here, rather than some outward authority. So this morning, I have to tell you, I resonate with that, and I would like to talk to you about how to be spiritual, but not religious. And what I have are 4 points, or 4 pillars, that will make a foundation for having a spiritual life. And this will work for you whether you're a believer or an atheist. It doesn't matter. This will give you a spiritual life. So let me just go through the 4 very quickly. Number 1, practice sameness. S-A-M-E-N-E-S-S. It's from the first reading. And that first reading this morning comes from an Indian Buddhist monk who lived in the 8th century. His name was Shantideva. He said, when you begin the spiritual path, strive at first to meditate upon the sameness of yourself and others. Evidently, in his day, 8th century India, people had the same problem then that we have today. Namely, they see differences rather than commonality. And so Shantideva just cuts right through that dysfunctional view, and he says, in effect, look, don't see yourself as better than others. Don't see yourself as lower than others. Sameness. See everybody the same. And you know, when we can see the sameness, the most amazing thing happens is that fences come down, barriers crumble, and defenses are broken. Let me tell you a story. 10 years ago, a group of Tibetan monks, famous for their deep, multi-vocal chanting, were invited to perform in California's infamous San Quentin prison. Also that day, it was going to be a choir concert. Also performing that day would be the San Quentin Prison Gospel Choir. As the date approached, the organizers from the Tibetan side began to hear from within the prison. Some people were grumbling that non-Christians were coming to the chapel to perform. And so on the Tibetan side, they were very concerned that there was going to be a religious and cultural gap between these two groups, something they didn't want. The last thing they wanted to do was walk in and be perceived as foreigners practicing a false religion. So they had to find a way to bridge it. And the man who introduced the Tibetans that morning, it had to be an unbelievable moment of inspiration, because I want you to hear his introduction to the Tibetan monks. But I want you to hear it in the context that it was offered. Just pretend for a moment that you are incarcerated in San Quentin and you have a prison sentence anywhere from 7 years to life. Now here's the introduction to the Tibetans. Friends, almost all of these Tibetan men who have joined us today have spent years in harsh prisons. The Communist Chinese Army not only imprisoned them for expressing their beliefs, but tortured them as well. Somehow, they escaped or were released from prison. Then, to find freedom, they walked across the Himalayas, the highest mountains on earth. Some had to tie rags on their feet because they had no shoes. But even now, far from their families and community, they do not know if they will ever see them or be able to return. What has kept them going through all of their struggle have been their songs and their prayers. And this is what they will sing for you today. Yeah. They sang. And then before the gospel choir, made up all of African American men, big men who spent most of the time in the prison yard bulking up. Before they began to sing, there were so many tears on their eyes that they left the bleachers, went down, and embraced these small Tibetan Buddhist monks and could be heard saying, "I love you, brother." Sameness. When you begin on a spiritual path, remember to meditate on the sameness of yourself and others. Now that's an Indian monk. That second reading that we heard this morning, do any of you know where it came from? Where? It's actually from the Gospel of Matthew. And it's Jesus who teaches sameness, but uses a different way to describe it. Evidently, it's from the Sermon on the Mount. He was asked, listen, what's God like, and how does he treat us? So here's his answer, and it's in Matthew 5:45, and I'm reading from a modern version of the Bible, the Message Bible. Here's Jesus. This is what God does. He gives his best, the sun to warm, the rain to nourish, to everyone, regardless, the good and the bad, the nice and the nasty. Now, what's important in that is what it doesn't say. Jesus does not say that God gives his best, the sun to warm, the rain to nourish, only on those who have accepted Jesus as their personal Savior. Only on those who are born again. No, just the opposite. To everyone, regardless, the good and the bad, sameness. So, if you want to be spiritual, not religious, practice sameness. That's point one. Here's point two. You want to be on a spiritual path? Slow down. You know, just think about it for a minute. Why does it seem that our planet is lacking in people with compassion and kindness? Some would say that people are naturally unkind and aggressive and self-serving. I don't like that response because of what it suggests, that we're inherently flawed. I think that the reason there may be an absence of compassion and kindness is because we're very busy. We're very rushed. I mean, think about it. People get up in the morning at 5:30 or 6, get kids ready for school or preschool, race to the school, race to work, run around all day, come home in the evening, after school activities, dinner to prepare, on and on and on it goes. Maybe kindness and compassion gets squeezed out. Do you remember the story in the Bible, the parable of the Good Samaritan? How somebody had been beaten and was really in bad shape, and 3 people walked by and only one stopped to help. The first one who walked by was a religious leader. The second one who walked by was a religious leader. And the third one who stopped to help was a social outcast. That's a story Jesus tells. And maybe the point that Jesus is making there is that the first two, the religious leaders, maybe they weren't unkind or lacking in a compassion gene. Maybe they were just busy, in a hurry to get somewhere. You know, that was put to the test in 1972. 2 social psychologists gathered 67 students from Princeton Theological Seminary. Now, they were tricked a little bit. They didn't know what was really going on. They told them that they were carefully selected and they were going to cross the street from the seminary to the university and go on the other side and explain to groups of students why they were going into ministry. And as part of their talk, they were to talk about the parable of the Good Samaritan, the stepping over of someone who'd been injured. Now, here's where the experiment gets interesting. What the students didn't know is that the 2 researchers hired an actor who would be on the very street that they would literally have to cross over him to get to the university. He was to pretend that he had been injured seriously and lay on the ground, obviously in need of help. And here's what they were testing. They wanted to know, out of the 67, who would stop to help. They divided them into 3 groups: high hurry, medium hurry, and low hurry. Here's how it worked. The first group, the high hurry, after finishing the questionnaire and meeting, they said, okay, you're all late for the talk. They were expecting you a few minutes ago. You better get going. The second, the medium group, they were told that a teaching assistant was ready and you need to go over, but you do have a minute or 2. Low medium group, they were told it'll be a few minutes before they're ready for you, but you might as well head on over there. Here's what happened. Remember, he's laying there and he's obviously injured. In the high hurry group, only 10% stopped to help. In the medium hurry group, 45% stopped to help. In the low hurry group, 65% stopped to help. So it seems to me that to increase compassion on the planet, all we need to do is hurry up and slow down. So, if you want a spiritual path, practice sameness, slow down. Number 3, serve others. Don't just look out for number 1. It's okay to do that, but also look out for number 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and all the way down. Spirituality and service, they go hand in hand. There's no such thing as one without the other. That's probably the great lesson from the life of Mother Teresa. And shortly before she died, she sent a handwritten letter to her co-workers. They weren't really her co-workers, they were volunteers all over the world, people inspired by her. And listen to what she asked of them. To my co-workers, I would like you to concentrate more in giving wholehearted free service to the poor in your area. Each one of you, try to find out the lonely, the unwanted, the handicapped, the odd, the eccentric, the friendless. And maybe all you can do is smile when you see them. Do a small visit. Just read. And she says, yes, these things are very, very small, but that will be your love of God in action. Let it radiate from your heart into your community. Serve others. My last point, if you want to be on a spiritual path, number 4, cultivate hope. That's an essential spiritual practice to grow in your life. Because if you don't have hope, what happens is you get discouraged. You know, the Buddha said that discouragement is just another form of laziness. Yeah, you think about that. And when we become discouraged, then there's a downward spiral that takes place. We can become cynical, bitter, despairing, and feeling totally hopeless. And so whatever it is that's going on in your life, no matter how good or how bad, cultivate hope. Do any of you know the name Thich Nhat Hanh? If you do, put your hand up. A few of you do? Okay, good. He's a Buddhist monk, Vietnamese, still alive. His books are very, very popular. You can find them at Barnes & Noble and Border Books. When he was young, a young monk, he lived in Saigon, and he was essentially what we would call the youth minister at his temple. Just outside of Saigon, the Americans severely bombed the village, pretty much destroying it. And when Thich Nhat Hanh heard about it, he asked the youth group, and it was a large one, he asked them to go to the village and help them rebuild their huts. They did. And then the Americans bombed it a second time. Thich Nhat Hanh sent them back again to help rebuild. And for some reason, it seemed to have been on the crosshairs of American foreign policy. It was bombed the third time. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, go back and rebuild again. But this time, the youth group resisted, saying, what is the point of rebuilding a village when we know it's just going to be bombed? And Thich Nhat Hanh said, in good Buddhist style, he said, you're getting discouraged. Remember, the Buddha said that's just a form of laziness. He said, go back and you continue rebuilding. Now, I want to take that story and apply it here. If there's someone here this morning and your grip on hope is weakening and you're ready to give up, remember that story. Go back to your life, continue rebuilding. And if you're here this morning, you think, I just can't take it anymore, stop, go back, continue rebuilding. If you feel I just can't take another step forward, continue rebuilding. Do not indulge yourself in discouragement. You have to fight for yourself. You have to push through the pain and the discomfort and give hope a chance. And if you do that, the moment will come when everything changes for the better. So if you want to be on a spiritual path, practice sameness, slow down, serve others, cultivate hope. That's all there is to it. Thank you.